In a busy village that stretched along the banks of a sparkling river, there lived a young woman named Lulu. She was not tall, not very strong, and her hands were soft from working with flowers rather than heavy tools. But there was something else about her that made the villagers whisper and laugh whenever she tried to speak in front of them. Lulu had a stammer. Each word she wanted to say seemed to get stuck inside her mouth, tripping over itself like a little bird trying to fly for the first time. Sometimes she would try to call out to someone, but the words would come out slowly and broken, and the other villagers would giggle behind her back or shake their heads in impatience. From the time she was a little girl, Lulu had learned to keep her voice small. She would avoid speaking when others were around unless it was absolutely necessary. When children teased her at school, she would hide behind trees or sit by the river alone, tracing patterns in the sand with her fingers. When adults whispered unkind words, calling her clumsy or slow, Lulu would just nod quietly and try not to let it hurt too much. Deep inside, she had a heart that wanted to give and care for others, and she believed that kindness mattered more than what people thought about her speech. Every morning, Lulu woke before the sun rose. She would step outside her small home, brushing the dew from the grass with her bare feet, and make her way to the royal garden at the edge of the village. The garden was a place full of life, full of colors and smells that made the world feel soft and kind. Bright orange marigolds swayed beside deep purple lavender. Rows of red tomatoes and golden corn grew strong and healthy. Birds sang in the trees above, filling the air with music that made Lulu smile, even when the villagers' laughter echoed in her mind. In the garden, Lulu felt safe. No one in the village came there to mock her. She could talk to the flowers, to the birds, or to the gentle breeze, and it felt like the world was listening without judgment. She knew the names of every plant, every tree, every flower. She watered them carefully, whispered encouragement to the seedlings, and sometimes, when the sun was warm and the wind soft, she would hum little tunes she had made up herself. The garden became her own little kingdom, a place where she was not judged for the way her words came out, but only for the care and love she gave. Even though she loved the garden, Lulu knew that life outside its walls was hard. Villagers often ignored her, refused to listen, or made fun of her. She remembered the market day when she had tried to buy a loaf of bread. She had asked politely, "Sisi, could I have a loaf of BB bread, please?" The baker had laughed loudly in the middle of the market square, holding the bread high above her head. Children nearby had joined in, teasing her with cruel songs. Lulu had turned quickly and walked away, holding back tears, her face burning with shame. That memory, even years later, made her stomach twist, but she had learned to carry it quietly, like a heavy stone she kept in her pocket. Despite all of this, Lulu had a small circle of friends who understood her. There was a tiny brown cat named Kiko that followed her everywhere in the garden. Kiko never laughed at her words, never judged the pauses or the stumbles. There was also an old woman named Nana who lived near the riverbank. Nana always greeted Lulu with a warm smile and a pat on the hand, saying, "Words are not the only way to show who you are, my dear. Your heart speaks more than your voice ever could." Lulu believed Nana, and it gave her courage when the world felt too heavy. One morning, as the sun rose in golden streaks across the sky, Lulu noticed something strange in the royal garden. A row of young tomato plants was wilting, their leaves drooping and their stems weak. She knew immediately that the soil had a problem, maybe a sickness that could spread if she did not act fast. Without a second thought, she gathered water from the river, mixed the soil with special herbs she had learned about from Nana, and tended to the plants carefully. She worked for hours, moving from one plant to another, brushing off tiny pests, trimming weak leaves, and humming softly to keep herself company. By evening, the plants looked stronger, and Lulu felt a quiet pride in her heart. It was moments like this that made her feel alive. The villagers might not understand her, might laugh at her when she tried to speak, but in the garden, her hands and her heart spoke louder than words. She had a gift for seeing what others could not. She noticed when a plant was thirsty before the leaves drooped. She knew when a flower needed more sun or more shade. She understood the land, the wind, the rain, and the tiny creatures that lived among the roots. In this way, Lulu felt a sense of purpose that she could not find anywhere else. Still, even in her safe place, Lulu could not completely escape the sting of loneliness. Sometimes she would sit by the edge of the garden and watch the villagers from afar. They walked quickly, carrying baskets and bundles, speaking to each other without hesitation. She envied them, not for their strength or their wealth, but for the ease with which they could speak and be heard. She wished, just a little, that her words could come out clearly, that she could ask a question or tell a story without fear of laughter. But then she would look at the flowers, at the bees busy collecting nectar, at Kiko curling up in the sun, and she would remember Nana's words. It is not the voice that matters most, it is the heart. One day while Lulu was tending the royal garden, a young boy from the village named Jomo came running in. Jomo was loud and energetic, full of confidence, the opposite of Lulu in every way. "Lulu, Lulu, you must come quickly," he shouted. She flinched as the words made her heart race, but she followed him. He led her to a small corner of the village square where a group of children was trying to lift a large cart that had tipped over. No adult was near. Without thinking, Lulu ran to help. She pushed and lifted with all her strength, guiding the children to move the cart safely. She did not speak much, but her actions were clear and kind. The children laughed with relief and thanked her, forgetting for a moment that she often stammered. This small act, unnoticed by most of the adults, reminded Lulu that she could make a difference even when words failed her. Every evening, when the village quieted and the sky turned soft shades of pink and purple, she would return to the garden and care for her plants with renewed energy. She would talk softly to the flowers, imagining that they understood her completely. She would water the soil and watch tiny sprouts emerge, feeling proud of the life she was helping to grow. In her quiet moments, Lulu dreamed of a day when people would see her for more than her stammer. She imagined the villagers smiling at her not because she tried to speak perfectly, but because of the good she did. She imagined that even the king, who rarely left the castle, might notice her gentle courage and clever mind. These thoughts made her heart swell, a quiet hope that kept her going when the days were hard. The seasons changed and Lulu continued her work. She learned the patterns of rain and sun, discovered ways to make the soil richer, and found new herbs that kept the plants healthy. Each morning she would step into the garden with a sense of purpose, no longer worrying so much about what people said. The morning sun rose slowly over the village, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. Birds chirped cheerfully, and the air smelled of fresh earth and blooming flowers. Lulu was already in the royal garden, watering the marigolds and humming quietly to herself. The soft tune made Kiko, her little brown cat, purr and stretch lazily in the sun. Everything seemed peaceful, as if the world had no troubles at all. But that peace did not last long. A town crier, ringing a large bell and shouting loudly, came running through the village square. "Hear ye, hear ye." A message from the king. His voice was strong, commanding everyone to stop what they were doing and listen. The villagers gathered quickly, jostling each other to get closer. Some looked excited, others nervous. Lulu paused, holding her watering can, and cautiously walked toward the crowd. The crier's voice boomed across the square. "The king has discovered a serious problem in the castle walls. A hidden flaw could allow enemies to sneak into the kingdom. Anyone who can find the flaw and help protect the castle will be greatly rewarded." A murmur ran through the villagers. Some laughed. Others shook their heads in disbelief. "Who could possibly do that?" they whispered. "We are simple villagers, not soldiers or builders." Lulu felt a small flutter in her chest. Her hands tightened around the watering can. Most people would have laughed and walked away, but something in her stirred. She had always loved noticing details, watching carefully and thinking quietly. Maybe she could see something others did not. Maybe she could help. A spark of courage ignited inside her. But even as she thought this, she felt the old fear rising. The villagers would laugh at her again. They had laughed at her words, at her stammer, at her quiet nature. If she tried, would they mock her for failing? Would they point and whisper? Still, Lulu took a deep breath. The garden, the flowers, the little birds and bees, all of them had taught her patience and care. She had learned that trying, even when it was hard, was always worth it. She would not let fear stop her this time. That afternoon, Lulu quietly slipped away from the village square and walked toward the castle. The castle was large and old, with tall stone walls that gleamed in the sun. Guards patrolled the ramparts, and banners with the king's emblem fluttered in the wind. Most villagers had no reason to go near the castle, but Lulu moved carefully, watching every corner, every stone, every archway. She remembered Nana's words, "Your heart speaks louder than your voice, Lulu. Watch closely, think carefully, and act with care." Lulu nodded to herself. She would watch. She would notice. And she would try. The castle walls were thick and strong, but Lulu knew that even the strongest walls could have hidden flaws. She walked slowly along the outer wall, her eyes scanning for cracks, loose stones, or anything unusual. She noticed small details others might have ignored. A tiny piece of moss growing in a crack, a stone that looked slightly different from the rest, a small trail of dirt that led to a hidden corner. She touched the stones gently, feeling for weaknesses, listening for any hollow sound that might indicate a secret passage. Hours passed and the sun began to sink low in the sky. Most villagers had returned home thinking the challenge was impossible. But Lulu continued. She moved silently, watching the guards and listening to the wind. Sometimes she would stop to crouch and look closely at the ground, tracing the shape of each stone with her fingers. Kiko, who had followed her to the edge of the castle, meowed softly as if encouraging her. As evening approached, Lulu discovered something remarkable. Behind a row of ivy partially hidden from view, was a small, narrow tunnel. It was not easy to see unless someone was looking carefully. Her heart raced. This could be the secret flaw the king had spoken about. She knelt and examined the tunnel. The entrance was just large enough for a person to crawl through, and it led toward the inner walls of the castle. She realized that if enemies found this tunnel, they could sneak inside without being seen. Lulu's mind raced with thoughts. She could keep this discovery to herself, but that would not help the kingdom. She could try to tell someone, but her stammer made her nervous. What if they laughed at her? What if they did not believe her? But then she thought of the flowers, the garden, and the small acts of kindness she had done for others. She had learned that actions mattered more than fear. She could not let her words stop her from doing what was right. She carefully traced the tunnel with her fingers, memorizing every detail: how wide it was, how deep it went, the loose stones near the entrance, and the way it connected to the outer wall. The next morning, Lulu returned to the village square. The town crier was there again, ringing his bell and reminding everyone of the king's challenge. The villagers laughed when they saw her approaching. "Lulu, what can you do? You can't even finish a sentence without stammering," one of them shouted. Others giggled and pointed. Lulu felt the familiar sting of embarrassment, but she ignored it. She took a deep breath and walked past them. Her heart was steady. She had seen the flaw. She knew the way to help. The laughter of the villagers was just noise. She made her way to the castle gates and asked politely to see one of the king's advisors. Her words came slowly, haltingly, and she stammered a little, but she pushed forward. I have found something, a tunnel that leads to the inside," she said, her voice trembling. The guard raised an eyebrow, unsure if she was serious. But Lulu did not give up. She led the guard to the ivy-covered corner, showing him the hidden tunnel. He looked surprised, then impressed. He sent for the king immediately. When the king arrived, Lulu explained everything she had seen. She pointed to the stones, the entrance, and the way the tunnel connected to the castle walls. Her words were broken at first, but the king listened carefully. He asked questions and Lulu answered, pausing when needed but never losing her focus. She had prepared for this moment with careful observation, and her actions spoke louder than her stammer. The king nodded thoughtfully. "You have done well, young woman. This flaw could have caused great danger to the kingdom. Your courage and attention have saved us all." Lulu's heart leapt. She had done something important. She had faced her fear, ignored the laughter of others, and acted when it mattered most. The villagers who had laughed at her that morning were silent now. They could not deny what she had found. Some looked ashamed while others stared in awe. Lulu felt a quiet pride swell in her chest. For the first time she realized that her worth was not in her words, but in her actions, her courage, and her heart. That evening Lulu returned to the royal garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in pink and gold. She knelt among the flowers, touching the soft petals and whispering to them softly, even though her voice still stammered. Kiko curled up beside her, purring in contentment. Lulu smiled. The world outside might not always understand her, but she had learned something important. Bravery comes in many forms, and even the quietest voices can make a difference when they act with courage. And so, in a village that once mocked her, Lulu began to feel a change. The king had seen her heart and actions. Perhaps one day the villagers would too. For now, Lulu knew she had done something remarkable, and that knowledge filled her with a quiet joy she had never felt before. The royal garden, the flowers, and the soft songs of birds seemed to celebrate her courage, as if the world itself was telling her that she mattered. From that day on, Lulu walked a little taller. She still stammered when she spoke, but it no longer held her back. She had faced fear, discovered a secret, and shown that even a quiet, gentle heart could achieve great things. And in the quiet of the royal garden, surrounded by life and beauty, Lulu felt a new sense of hope. A hope that whispered to her that she had a place in the world, and that her courage could change it, one careful step at a time. The night was calm and quiet in the village. The moon hung high in the sky, casting silver light over the rooftops and the fields. Stars twinkled faintly above, like tiny lanterns guiding those who were brave enough to follow their path. Lulu had waited until everyone in the village was asleep before leaving her small home. She knew that this was her chance to explore the castle quietly, away from the eyes of guards and the whispers of villagers. Her heart beat fast as she walked through the soft shadows of the night. Kiko, her little brown cat, followed close behind, patting silently on the ground. The cool night air brushed her cheeks, and she felt a mixture of fear and excitement. Fear because she was alone and the castle was large and unknown. Excitement because she had a task, and her heart told her that she could make a difference. Lulu reached the castle gates and slipped through a side door that she had discovered the previous day. The castle was enormous, with tall stone walls, towers reaching into the sky, and long corridors that seemed to go on forever. Each step she took echoed softly in the empty halls. Shadows stretched across the floors, and the flickering light of distant torches danced on the walls. Lulu felt small in such a big place, but she remembered Nana's words, "Courage is not the absence of fear, Lulu. It is acting despite the fear." She moved carefully along the corridors, keeping to the edges and listening for any sounds of guards. Her eyes scanned every detail, the cracks in the walls, the shapes of the stones, the way the wind whispered through tiny openings. Every detail mattered. She had to be precise. She could not afford to miss anything. After some time, Lulu came to the ivy-covered corner she had discovered earlier. The hidden tunnel was almost invisible in the darkness, but she could see it clearly. She knelt down and touched the entrance, feeling the rough stones and the soft moss growing between them. She could tell that the tunnel led straight toward the inner walls of the castle. If enemies found it, they could sneak inside without being seen. Lulu's hands shook slightly as she pulled out a small notebook from her bag. She had brought it with her to write down everything she observed. She began to sketch the entrance carefully, noting the size, the shape, and the direction it led. She drew the loose stones, the cracks, and the tiny marks in the dirt that might indicate movement. She wanted to be certain that she could explain it later, even if her voice faltered when she spoke. She paused and listened. The castle was quiet except for the distant footsteps of a guard in another corridor. Lulu held her breath, waiting for the sound to pass before continuing. Kiko meowed softly as if encouraging her to go on. Lulu smiled and went back to her notes. Every detail mattered. Every small mark could be the difference between safety and danger for the kingdom. Hours passed as Lulu explored the tunnel carefully. She crawled slowly inside, her hands brushing the cold stone walls. She noticed that the floor was uneven, with some stones loose and others firmly in place. She traced her fingers along the walls, memorizing every curve and crack. She took careful notes, writing down measurements and drawing small maps in her notebook. Her stammer did not matter here. Her thoughts and actions were clear, precise, and important. As she moved further into the tunnel, she realized that it led to a small chamber near the castle's inner wall. The chamber was dusty and unused, but it was connected to several passages that could give thieves access to the castle's heart. Lulu's eyes widened. If she could alert the king and his advisors, they could block these tunnels and protect the kingdom. She had discovered something vital, something that could save many lives. Lulu carefully retraced her steps, making sure to memorize every detail of the tunnel on her way back. She did not want to miss anything. The night was deep and the moonlight was fading, but she felt more determined than ever. She knew that what she was doing was important. She knew that her courage mattered. Back at the ivy-covered entrance, she paused and looked at the castle walls. They were tall and strong, yet even the strongest walls had weaknesses. She realized that being quiet and careful, observing without rushing, had allowed her to see what others could not. She smiled to herself. Perhaps this was her gift, not loud words but careful observation and thoughtful action. When Lulu returned home, she felt a mix of exhaustion and pride. She had spent the whole night in the castle, documenting every detail, yet she felt stronger than ever. She placed her notebook carefully on the table and ran a hand through her hair. The village was still asleep and she was alone with her thoughts. She knew that the next step would be the hardest. She would have to tell someone to explain what she had found despite her stammer. She thought about the villagers who laughed at her, the children who teased her, and the adults who whispered unkind words. Their voices echoed in her mind, but she pushed them aside. She could not let fear of laughter stop her from doing what was right. The king needed to know. The kingdom needed to know. Her actions could make a difference, even if her voice trembled when she spoke. The next morning, Lulu returned to the castle with her notebook. She walked with a steady step, though her heart was pounding. She had rehearsed what she would say in her mind. I have found a tunnel, she whispered to herself, her words halting. A tunnel that leads inside the castle? She paused, took a deep breath, and reminded herself that courage was acting despite fear. She found a guard and politely asked to see one of the king's advisors. Her stammer made her voice slow, but she did not stop. She led the advisor to the ivy-covered entrance and showed him the tunnel. She pointed to the stones, the cracks, and the hidden path inside. The advisor listened carefully, nodding and taking notes. Lulu's heart raced. She had done it. She had shared what she had discovered. The advisor sent word to the king immediately. When the king arrived, Lulu explained everything she had observed. She spoke slowly, pausing to find the right words, but she did not falter in her actions. She unrolled her notebook, showing sketches, measurements, and details of the tunnel. The king studied her notes, then looked at Lulu directly. "You have done well," he said. "This tunnel could have been a great danger. Your careful observation and courage have saved us all." Lulu felt a warmth spread through her chest. The villagers who had laughed at her words, who had pointed and whispered, were not here to mock her. Here in the castle, her actions were seen and valued. Her stammer did not matter. Her heart, her courage, and her careful mind were what truly counted. That evening, Lulu returned to the royal garden. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the flowers. She knelt among the marigolds, touching the petals gently, and whispered softly, "I did it. I helped." Kiko rubbed against her legs, purring happily. Lulu smiled. The world outside might not always understand her, but she had learned an important truth. Courage is not about speaking perfectly. Courage is about acting when it matters most. From that day on, Lulu felt a change inside herself. She still stammered when she spoke, but it no longer frightened her. She knew that even quiet, careful actions could make a difference. She had faced her fear, explored the castle, and discovered the secret tunnel that threatened the kingdom. And in doing so, she had proven to herself that she could be brave, even when words failed her. The royal garden seemed brighter that night. The flowers swayed in the soft breeze as if celebrating her courage. Kiko curled up beside her, purring in contentment. Lulu looked at the stars above and whispered a soft promise to herself. She would continue to act with courage, to protect and help those who could not help themselves, no matter what others said. Her stammer was just a small part of her, but her heart, her mind, and her courage would always speak louder. And so, under the quiet night sky, Lulu sat in the garden, feeling a sense of pride she had never felt before. She had faced the unknown, explored the castle alone, and taken careful, thoughtful action to protect the kingdom. For the first time, she truly believed that her courage could make a difference. The morning of the great assembly arrived with bright sunlight spilling over the castle walls. Flags fluttered in the wind, and the sounds of the village reached even the high towers. The king had summoned all the villagers to the royal court, announcing that he wished to hear from anyone who had discovered the secret flaw in the castle. Rumors had spread quickly, and the villagers were buzzing with curiosity. Some were excited, some skeptical, and some still whispered cruelly about Lulu, the young woman who stammered and kept mostly to herself. Lulu stood at the edge of the courtyard, holding her notebook tightly. Her fingers trembled as she smoothed the cover, as if holding it would give her courage. She looked around and saw familiar faces among the crowd. Villagers who had laughed at her, neighbors who had whispered insults, and even children who had once teased her mercilessly. Her stomach twisted with nervousness. Could she really stand in front of all of them and speak? Could she show them the value of her careful observation, her courage, her actions, even if her words stumbled along the way? Kiko, her little brown cat, had slipped into her bag before she left the house and now peered out, blinking up at her as if to say, "You can do this." Lulu took a deep breath, remembering Nana's words, "Your heart speaks louder than your voice, Lulu. Let it guide you." She nodded quietly to herself. That heart, that courage was what mattered now. She had done something important. The villagers murmured as she stepped forward. Some smirked, whispering, "Can she even say a full sentence?" Others shook their heads. But Lulu did not let it stop her. She walked into the court, where the king sat on his high throne. The hall was vast, with tall pillars and sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. Servants bowed and stepped aside as she approached. The king's eyes were kind but sharp, filled with curiosity and intelligence. He had heard about her discovery and wanted to see the young woman who had found the tunnel. Lulu cleared her throat, her mouth dry, and tried to speak. "Am my lord?" I found," she stammered, her words slow and broken. A few villagers snickered, but the king raised his hand and the room fell silent. He leaned forward, watching her carefully as if waiting for her to continue. Lulu's heart pounded, but she pressed on, her determination stronger than her fear. She opened her notebook and placed it on the table before the king. "A tunnel that leads TT to the castle, that could be used by enemies." Her hands shook slightly, but she pointed to her carefully drawn sketches, showing the entrance, the loose stones, and the path the tunnel took inside the walls. She explained the measurements, the cracks, and how she had traced every step to ensure nothing was missed. Her words were slow, each syllable a struggle, but the king listened carefully, nodding as she spoke. As she spoke, she noticed a change in the room. The villagers who had laughed earlier were now silent. Their eyes were fixed on the sketches, on the details, and on Lulu herself. Some leaned forward, trying to see exactly what she was showing. They could not deny the importance of what she had discovered. Even if her voice faltered, her actions, her careful planning, and her cleverness shone through. The king asked questions and Lulu answered with courage. How wide is the entrance? He asked. About 4 feet, my lord, she replied, pausing to find the words. And it leads toward the inner wall. She showed the sketches, pointing carefully to each section, explaining the risks the tunnel posed if left unguarded. The king leaned closer, studying her work. He could see that she had thought through every detail, anticipating potential dangers and taking notes that no ordinary villager would have noticed. The court was quiet except for her stammered words. But in that quiet, Lulu's cleverness spoke louder than any speech could. She explained how she had observed the stones, how she had memorized the tunnel, and how she had discovered the chamber that could be a hidden path for thieves. The king's eyes shone with understanding. He could see the bravery it had taken for her to explore the castle alone at night in silence, with no one to guide her. Your courage is remarkable, young woman, the king said finally, his voice strong and clear. You risked much to protect this kingdom. You observed carefully, acted wisely, and thought through every detail. Your actions have saved us all. Lulu felt her chest swell with pride. Her stammer did not matter here. Her words had struggled to escape her lips, but her actions, her cleverness, and her determination had spoken clearly enough. The villagers were astonished. Some looked guilty for having laughed at her. Some whispered among themselves, amazed at the intelligence and bravery of the young woman they had mocked. Lulu noticed the children staring with wide eyes, and she realized that they were seeing her as someone who could be brave, who could act when it mattered, despite fear and difficulty. The king continued, let this be a lesson to all. Courage is not measured by the speed of your words or the ease of your speech. It is measured by the strength of your heart, the care in your actions, and the bravery to act when it matters most. Lulu's eyes filled with tears, not from fear this time but from relief and happiness. For the first time she felt truly recognized, truly valued for who she was and what she could do. He stood and raised his hands. I declare that this young woman shall be honored for her bravery and intelligence. Let her serve as an example to all in the kingdom. Lulu bowed her head, her heart racing. She had done it. She had faced her fear, shared her discovery, and been recognized not for flawless speech, but for her courage and cleverness. After the king's announcement, some villagers approached Lulu cautiously. I didn't know you could, one man stammered, trailing off. A little girl whispered, you were so brave. I want to be like you. Lulu smiled gently. She could see that their respect was real, even if it was mixed with surprise. She nodded quietly, realizing that she had changed how they saw her. Even as she walked back to the royal garden later that day, Lulu felt the joy of accomplishment. The sunlight warmed her face and the flowers seemed to glow brighter. She knelt among the marigolds, brushing petals with her fingers and whispered softly, I did it. I helped. Kiko purred beside her, nudging her hand. The garden, the place where she had always felt safe, now felt like a kingdom she had earned through courage and determination. That evening, as the stars began to shine in the night sky, Lulu reflected on the events of the day. She thought of the moments she had been afraid, the times she had doubted herself, and the courage it had taken to stand in front of the king and the villagers. She realized that bravery did not mean being fearless. It meant acting despite fear, taking careful steps, and trusting in the value of one's own heart and mind. She remembered Nana's words again, your heart speaks louder than your voice. Lulu understood now. Her heart had spoken through her actions, through her careful observation, and through her bravery in exploring the castle alone. Her voice had stumbled, but it had not mattered. What mattered was what she had done, what she had discovered, and the courage she had shown. The villagers would talk about her discovery for many days. They would remember her careful planning, her bravery, and her cleverness. Some would regret having laughed at her before. Some would be inspired by her example. Lulu knew that she had changed something in their minds and hearts. She had shown them that courage could come from the quietest person, that bravery was not always loud, and that intelligence was not always obvious at first glance. And so, in the castle where the king had recognized her courage, and in the village where whispers and laughter had once followed her, Lulu felt a quiet pride that filled her completely. She had faced her fears, shared her discovery, and proven that actions mattered more than words. Her stammer was just a small part of her, but it would never stop her from acting with bravery, from thinking carefully, and from helping others when it mattered most. That night, Lulu returned to the royal garden and sat among the flowers, feeling a new sense of belonging. The marigolds swayed gently in the evening breeze, as if acknowledging her courage. Kiko curled up in her lap, purring softly. Lulu looked at the stars above, thinking of the king's words and the quiet strength she had discovered in herself. She knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more opportunities to act, and she would face them with the same courage, careful thought, and heart that had guided her so far. From that day on, Lulu walked through the village with a little more confidence. She still stammered when she spoke and some villagers still stared, but it no longer mattered. She had learned the power of her actions, the value of her courage, and the importance of her cleverness. She had been recognized by the king, and even more importantly, she had recognized her own worth. The morning sun rose over the village, casting golden light on rooftops and fields. Birds sang from the trees, and a soft breeze carried the sweet scent of flowers from the royal garden. Lulu woke early, her heart filled with a quiet excitement. Today was the day the king had promised to announce a great honor for her. She still stammered when she spoke, and she still felt the familiar flutter of nervousness in her stomach, but something inside her had changed. She had learned the meaning of courage and action, and that knowledge gave her strength far greater than fear. She dressed carefully, wearing the simple clothes she always favored, and tied her hair neatly. Kiko, her little brown cat, rubbed against her legs, purring as if sensing the importance of the day. Lulu patted her gently. "We must go, Kiko," she whispered, her voice soft and hesitant. The cat meowed and followed her out the door. Together they walked toward the castle, the path familiar now from her previous visits and night explorations. The castle courtyard was already busy with villagers and courtiers. Some whispered excitedly about Lulu, while others watched with curiosity, unsure of what to expect. Lulu noticed faces that had once laughed at her, faces that had once mocked her stammer. She felt a flicker of nerves, wondering how they would react to her honor, but she held her head high and walked forward, determined to let her actions speak for themselves. Inside the great hall, the king waited, seated on his high throne. His eyes sparkled with kindness and respect as Lulu approached. Courtiers bowed and stepped aside, creating a clear path for her. The king motioned for her to come closer. "Lulu," he said, his voice calm and firm, "you have shown bravery, intelligence, and wisdom beyond your years. Your careful observation and courageous actions have protected this kingdom. Today, I appoint you as my trusted advisor." Lulu's heart leapt. Her hands shook slightly, but she managed a small bow. "Thank you, lord," she stammered, her voice hesitant but sincere. The king smiled, waving for her to rise. He gestured for the courtiers and villagers to witness. "Let all see that courage is not measured by how clearly one speaks, but by the heart, mind, and actions of a person. Lulu's bravery has saved this kingdom, and she shall serve as an example to us all." The hall erupted in applause. Some villagers were silent, their mouths open in surprise, while others clapped slowly, uncertain at first, then with growing admiration. Children in the crowd pointed to her, eyes wide with amazement. "Look, it's Lulu. She's so brave," one whispered. The adults too began to murmur in approval. Those who had once mocked her began to see her in a new light. They understood now that her courage and cleverness were far more important than the speed of her words. Lulu felt a mixture of pride and humility. She had never sought recognition. She had only wanted to help. Yet here she was, honored by the king himself, respected by the villagers, and trusted to advise the kingdom. She realized that all the laughter, whispers, and teasing she had endured had not broken her spirit. Instead, they had made her stronger, more determined, and more aware of her own abilities. After the ceremony, the king invited Lulu to walk with him through the castle gardens. He asked her about the tunnel, how she had discovered it, and how she had observed it so carefully. Lulu explained everything, her stammer present but unimportant. The king listened intently, asking questions and nodding in admiration. "You think of everything," he said finally. "You notice what others miss and you act when it is most needed. That is true wisdom." As they walked, villagers gathered outside the castle to watch. Some cheered quietly, others clapped, and a few approached to speak with Lulu. One woman who had often whispered cruel words now said, "Lulu, I am sorry for laughing before. You are very brave." Lulu smiled gently, nodding. "It's okay," she said softly. I just wanted to help." The woman's eyes softened and she nodded with respect. The children were especially fascinated. They ran to Lulu, asking her to tell them about the tunnel and the castle. She knelt down, showing them the drawings from her notebook, explaining carefully how she had discovered the hidden passage. Her words stammered at times, but the children listened eagerly, their eyes shining with wonder. They learned that bravery was not about speaking perfectly or being strong in every way, it was about noticing, caring, and acting with courage. Word of Lulu's bravery spread quickly throughout the village and the surrounding towns. Merchants, farmers, and travelers spoke of the young woman who had discovered the secret tunnel and earned the king's trust. Some came to see her in the royal garden, curious about the girl who had once been mocked for her stammer. Lulu welcomed them kindly, showing the flowers, explaining the plants, and sharing small tips for growing herbs and vegetables. Her knowledge and gentle nature impressed everyone who visited. Even the villagers who had mocked her began to change. They realized that courage, cleverness, and a kind heart mattered far more than clear speech. Children who had teased her now followed her example, learning from her patience and attention to detail. Adults began to consult her for advice, especially about the gardens, the fields, and other careful observations she had made. Lulu's reputation as a wise and brave young woman grew steadily. The king also called upon her frequently, asking her to advise on matters of security and planning. She suggested small improvements in the castle defenses, clever ways to notice potential dangers, and careful strategies for observing threats. Her ideas were simple yet effective, and the king valued her insight greatly. He often praised her in front of others, saying, "Lulu reminds us all that true strength lies not in words alone, but in careful thought, action, and courage." Lulu began to see herself differently too. She understood that her stammer was only a small part of who she was. It did not define her abilities, her courage, or her heart. She could be respected, admired, and trusted without speaking perfectly. Her actions, her thoughtfulness, and her bravery spoke louder than any words ever could. She felt a quiet confidence growing inside her, a strength that no fear or laughter could take away. Over time, Lulu continued to work in the royal garden and serve as the king's advisor. She became a role model in the village, not just for children but for adults as well. People learned to value courage, intelligence, and kindness above appearances or speech. They learned that quiet, careful actions could change lives and protect a kingdom. Lulu had shown them that true strength comes from within. One evening, as the sun set over the village and the royal garden, Lulu sat among the flowers. Kiko curled up beside her, purring softly. She looked at the marigolds and the lavender, the tomatoes and the corn, and felt a deep sense of peace. The villagers had learned to respect her, the king trusted her, and she had discovered her own strength. Her stammer no longer felt like a weakness, but just a part of her story, one that had not stopped her from acting when it mattered most. She whispered to Kiko softly, I did it? Help. I made a difference." The cat purred louder as if agreeing, and Lulu smiled. She knew that the journey had not been easy, but it had taught her the value of courage, the importance of action, and the power of a kind heart. In the days that followed, Lulu's life became busy but joyful. She helped plan small improvements in the village, advised the king on minor security matters, and taught children how to care for plants and observe their surroundings carefully. She continued to stammer at times, but it no longer mattered. Her heart and actions had earned respect and admiration far beyond words. One day a young boy approached her with wide eyes. "Lulu, I want to be brave like you," he said. She knelt to his level and smiled gently. "Cece, courage is in what you do, not just what you say," she told him softly. "Help others, watch carefully, and act with your heart. That is what makes you strong." The boy nodded eagerly, inspired by her words and actions. Even years later, the story of Lulu spread throughout the kingdom. She became a legend of quiet courage and clever action, remembered not for the sound of her voice but for the bravery and wisdom she showed when it mattered most. Villagers told their children about her, teaching them that strength comes from within, from careful thought, kindness, and action, not from how fast or clearly one can speak. In the royal garden, where she had always felt safe, Lulu continued to care for the flowers, the plants, and the little creatures that lived among them. Each morning she walked through the rows of marigolds, lavender, and tomatoes, her heart full of joy and pride. She knew she had earned her place in the kingdom through courage and action. And in the quiet of the evening, when the stars shone above and the village slept peacefully, Lulu reflected on her journey. She had been laughed at, mocked, and underestimated, but she had persevered. She had faced her fears, discovered the hidden tunnel, shared her knowledge and earned the king's trust. She had learned that true strength is in what you do, not how you speak. And that lesson, she knew, would guide her for the rest of her life.